My name's Angus Nielsen. I work currently as Senior Data Engineer at Trustpilot, which is a well-known internet company, hopefully most of you have heard of, working day-to-day with designing and building their data systems. My role in sort of day-to-day work is very varied, really, with working essentially with data, which is obviously a very well discussed topic these days. Everyone talks about big data and they talk about AI, but essentially my job is designing and building these systems that process the data. So, you know, one day can be working quite close in with writing code, building systems, building prototypes of systems. Other days I can be in meetings having discussions about how we're going to develop and plan the work, and you know, right through to discussing with the various stakeholders in the business as to what they want from the systems. Also can be doing presentations to the rest of the business or people externally on how our systems work. So yeah, it's a kind of varied job. No 2 days are the same, essentially. My very quick history of career and how I got here. Well, at school, I was probably typical from a dyslexic point of view, is that I was identified as could do better. I was constantly identified as not really performing particularly well, despite them assessing me as being smart. You know, so they attributed me with basically being lazy, all these kinds of things. I then fell into trying to do a degree. When I left university, I actually tried to do a physics degree. The academic side of it and everything I struggled with. And I ended up spending more of my time doing things like DJing and other more interesting things to me, and then dropping out of university. I then went to work for a little while in a business, or for a few years in a business, basically selling fireplaces and dealing with antique fireplaces. And that kind of, when it came to a natural end, the business was closing down. I took redundancy and I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I'd been working with the IT systems in the business, and I went, right, okay, I'm going to go and become a software engineer. At that time, when Napier University was doing quite accessible courses for people, I think, and I went for it. Started doing a software engineering degree, and it was there within that I did a year as a placement as part of the degree, which was useful for me because it was practical. And there was actually one of my colleagues there said, "Do you realize you're dyslexic?" And I was like, "Well, no." And he said, "Well, I am. I'm dyslexic. I've been diagnosed." And he says, "I can see all the kinds of behaviors." At that point, I did kind of an assessment. The company Standard Life were quite good about that kind of stuff. Even, you know, this was a few years ago, and so they basically you know, identified that I had that issue, which was kind of useful for me from sort of future development, then understanding that was something, and that it was probably not abnormal, that the problems I had with reading, writing, spelling, speaking aloud, I still can't to this day read from a script or read aloud. These kinds of things were perfectly normal, and I was able to adapt. So I completed the degree, got my first job in a small data analytics company in Edinburgh, working with essentially understanding and doing what they call data mining. Today we would call predictive analytics or AI, machine learning, these sorts of things. So that really interested me. I kind of thought, this is quite cool stuff. Scary and cool, but cool. And then just went from there. That job lasted for about 3.5 years, and then unfortunately 2008 happened, and almost everybody got made redundant at some point or another. But that's where I found that having a career in IT was really positive, because I didn't find any trouble picking up another job, and then went from there and worked with actually data and aeronautical information, and from there to a company working in medical data billing software and data in the United States. Again, moved once again to a company doing analytics on oil and gas and energy sector, and I finally ended up at Trustpilot. So, you know, I've worked through quite a number of different areas and domains. Each one is interesting and different, you know, from, as I say, aeronautics to the energy sector to finance. And as I say, now working at Trustpilot, which is a name hopefully a lot of people recognize now as a essentially an online review platform. And that's it. Always been about data. The job titles have varied. Sometimes I've been called an engineer, sometimes an architect, again back to an engineer, but largely the job titles have been less relevant than the job that I'm doing. And the job's fairly similar most of the time. It's taking and understanding the data and building systems that clean and manage it so that it can be better used by the business. Yeah, so dyslexia advantages are probably the ones that a lot of people talk about is visualization. And again, I think people think of IT and geeks and sat in front of a keyboard, and you know, we've all seen the films, you know, and they're typing lots of characters, and we would automatically think that's not dyslexic kind of job. But the environments I work in, a lot of that is now the equivalent of autocomplete, so you don't have to remember everything. You don't have to be too clear on that. But a lot of what I do day to day is drawing pictures, is drawing diagrams, understanding how flows of data go together, how flows of systems go together. And that visualization part has been kind of at the core of everything that I've done, even going right back to university when I did my dissertation. My dissertation was actually on visual modeling tools for software systems. And I built a component in that was designed to reimagine a visual design in different views. And again, being able to kind of see things in a visual sense was so important to that. You know, having typos, as long as you're consistent with typos, computers don't really care if you call something wrong. You know, again, in a university project, you know, someone pointed out that I'd misspelt something. Luckily, in this particular case, I misspelt it consistently all the way through, so the computer was fine with it. You know, so I found that would be the main advantage. Probably the kind of the general problem solving of thinking your way around things, which you probably build up automatically through having had dyslexia. And you know, when it comes to presentations, I think I've because I struggled so much with reading aloud, especially, or reading from a script, I've learned to present much more just off the cuff, which is very useful when you're doing, say, a tech presentation, because there is nothing more kind of uninteresting than someone just reading from a PowerPoint presentation and just reading aloud some script. You know, you generally, if you engage with the audience, I wouldn't say I'm in that category, but I've seen some excellent tech presenters and tech conferences who are engaging and, you know, funny and as well, which takes your audience with you, as opposed to just, you know, everyone going to sleep. And we probably all recognize that from teachers as well. We've all had lecturers and teachers in our time, some of whom, you know, are great because they engage you, and some who don't. So I kind of, and I see part of my job as teaching as well. So because I'm always teaching the next generation or other people that I'm working with on how to use the systems. Challenges, probably the classic is organization. My organization is not the best, kind of all over the place. I think being lucky in terms of working in environments I work in, I'm a strong advocate as well of agile environments where things are much more short, broken down into tasks, which helps keep you focused and helps keep you on track. We have plenty of tools now around these sorts of things that help and support that. And I've kind of come to like and use those, you know, everything from calendars to we use products like we call it, so Trello is maybe one that's an openly available one where you have a board, and you have all your tasks on the board and you just kind of move them from, you know, in progress and done and these kinds of things. So that's a kind of core part of agile, and agile development, I think, is probably one of the tools that suits and works well with dyslexia. And I think that's also, again, something to remember from the point of view of if you're looking at careers, these environments that are supportive of that. You know, again, just making sure that I use my calendar effectively. Always try and have everything in the calendar. Doesn't always work out, but you know, again, I think I've always been lucky as well, working in a profession where I'm not unusual. There's a large number of people with dyslexia, definitely, and other kinds of spectrums of learning difficulties, if you like, that exist in the industry. So, that we work in teams where one person has ADHD, there's another person on the autistic spectrum, and then there's somebody with dyslexia, and we all seem to manage to just get along and understand that these things that we support each other. And I found that. I got in happy to mention, but our head of technology or chief technology officer at Trustpilot is also dyslexic, and so he provides a supportive atmosphere to people with any kind of from any of these sorts of things. So that's a big plus is the companies themselves are supportive generally, I've found. So my favorite things about the job, I think it's working as part of a team of people. I think that, and everyone will say, obviously this is going to be recorded for forevermore, but everyone will remember lockdown, and that's where we are at the moment. And that's probably the most challenging part as well at the moment, is that separation from your colleagues. I mean, even though typically, in the companies I've worked in, working remotely often with a number of people anyway by default, because, they're in other countries, worked a lot extensively with people in the US and other part, Europe, whatever. So typically you would be on calls with them, but you also will always have endeavored to have face-to-face meetings, go and visit. Either they come to us or, as I say, trips to wherever they're based as well, because the face-to-face aspect is something that's, discussing, developing and designing and building something cool, or for somebody, a geek like me, what I define as cool anyway. But I think we're more increasingly being seen as this is really interesting stuff, and everyone talks about AI and all these sorts of things. Working at it is and working in that space is kind of exciting place to be at the moment. Yeah, so at Trustpilot, like quite a lot of the more innovative tech companies, we're given 20% of our time per work day, or per week, if you like. So if you think of it as a day per week where we can focus on other projects, that might be something that's directly or indirectly relevant to the company, but it might be that you want to expand your knowledge of a programming language or training. You may want to develop something. You may have this really cool idea that you think, wow, that would make things a lot easier for me or someone else, or some aspect of the business. But essentially it's open to use that time to develop in whatever way you want. I use part of my time, getting involved in areas like developing other people. So I talk to universities and various people about career paths in general. And obviously one of the things I'm doing here is talking to people about, why you should have a career in IT, why it's a great future, it's well paid, that sort of stuff. So that's kind of where I spend some of my time, but also a little bit of it goes on looking at IT projects myself and playing around with some ideas that interest me myself. So yeah, and I think it's something that was talked about many years ago, and companies have gradually adopted it. But it's it's great to be working at a company that is fully behind that concept. Helping people to kind of develop themselves is the most important thing. Yeah, so what would I advise myself back then? That's a really tricky question, but I would say my first advice would be to worry less. A second piece of advice would have been that computer stuff that you were quite interested in, that you quite liked when you were that age and you thought wasn't going to be a career. Turned out it was a career, which was exactly where I was then. And it was a very that was quite a number of years ago, and it was a different world. But computers were not the everyday objects that we see them as now. But I had got a little bit involved in programming at that age, and I didn't realize that it was something that would be a career other than that as well, I would say build your confidence. One of the other things that's helped me over the years was I started training in martial arts. But you know, the martial arts is just an example. You know, do something that allows you to be yourself and kind of build your own confidence through that. Through martial arts, I was also then became an instructor, and because I was then instructing people, I was then able to I think again also develop things like my confidence and presentation skills. Again, because of my reading aloud, I hadn't realized that, you know, at school we had this thing where you had to stand up in assembly, and I did everything. I managed to avoid through a variety of excuses, and, you know, including even pulling sickies to avoid having to do this reading aloud at whatever at school. But now I realize I don't need to be able to do that. I can just present and teach, do whatever I want without having to have a script in front of me. You know, so I was lucky that I found that particular avenue, but, you know, find something as well that gives you an opportunity to express that isn't perhaps academic as well, and then also, you know, but by all means pursue that academic career, and don't be frightened of it. Don't think you can't do it. The way that world is assessed now, I think, is so much better. I think continuous assessment is great. You know, computing type subjects lend themselves to that as well. You're not going to be sat constantly in an exam hall trying to write out stuff and realizing that you're going to lose, which I did in my day. You know, I was even losing marks in exams other than English for my spelling, because in those days they marked you down for bad spelling, even I think in history or other subjects. You know, I'd get the paper back going, you know, with red lines through all of it. We don't have that so much now, thankfully, but, you know, just, you know, everything will work out fine ultimately.